Welcome back to Out of the Fold. If you haven't listened to the first two parts of my interview with Isaac, please do so before listening to this one. No religious organizations, companies, or individuals were contacted for comment about any of the content of this episode. The views expressed are strictly those of the ones expressing them. I started by asking Isaac if he's taken sex education courses in college, and if his views on sex have changed since he left the Orthodox community.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that the most like dysfunctional I ever was about it was when I was a teenager and like really still kind of religious and like still really believe not all of this is substantiated necessarily like by actual text. In some cases they are, some cases they are, some cases the texts themselves aren't the most reputable and not everyone would consider them immutable to the same degree that other ones are. But there are horror stories in the similar way that Christians tell horror stories, like for girls and boys. Like boys, it's kind of like folk tale, but also like you don't really know what. That's another problem. Like when rabbis are telling you stuff that's immutable fact, when they tell you things that aren't immutable facts, they don't always necessarily make that so clear. I remember being told that like if you masturbate, like the souls of all those babies you killed will come after you, or I've heard that you'll be boiled alive. You'll be in hell. There isn't really a Jewish hell. Like hell is very debated in Jewish. The idea of like fire and brimstone is not like an actual fire and brimstone. It's definitely not for all eternity, and it's definitely not like true fire and brimstone. But like I was told that like there are specific punishments for certain actions you do in your life, and like if you masturbate, like you could be boiled alive in semen. Like you'll just be chilling in boiling semen. Like yeah, I was told that. I remember that. And again, that's not incredibly substantiated, but like when people are telling you stuff, you don't really know what to believe at some point. Like because all these texts, I don't really understand the language. I can't go look through these texts myself. And even if I could, they're very cryptic, written in an old, in thousands of years old, written in a different style, different grammar. Like they're very difficult to understand without years and years of study. So definitely no teenager, very rarely can teenagers peruse them through the text themselves and find out what they say. Everything is based on the word, the spoken word of the rabbi.
That's really interesting. And maybe you could help to clarify something for me then. Like if I've heard actually, and I don't think this is a stereotype, but like I've literally heard this from some Jews before that like, that they've said there is no hell. Like they don't believe in hell. Is that like one of those differences between being a Reform Jew and being an Orthodox Jew, in that like, Orthodox would teach these almost Dante Inferno type visions of hell, whereas Reform Jews, sort of just don't believe in it at all? Or is there something that I'm missing?
So, in my personal opinion, and this is the opinion of other people who have studied religion in depth objectively, is that many things in Orthodox Judaism that we see today were kind of taken from evangelical Christianity and other fundamentalist religions, like you mentioned, Islam. Like they kind of bled into each other a bit, these ideas.
Sure, yeah.
And certain ideas that were not part of Judaism at all kind of became part of Judaism, just because other religions were doing it. It was seen as like kind of good and connected, and things just kind of wires got crossed, and that's just how it is. So with regards to hell, what's interesting is that the actual Old Testament, the Torah, the most important book that we have, actually does not mention hell at all. Heaven is mentioned, as in the Garden of Eden and Olam Haba. It's called eternal life, but hell is never mentioned in the Torah. The Talmud does discuss the idea of there's many ideas thrown around. There's the idea that the maximum one can spend in quote unquote hell is like 12 months, and like what actually is there, and like what's the point? The point of hell is not like to punish people, it's to cleanse you so that you can be in the presence of God, because you can't be in the presence of God if your sins outweigh your good deeds. And that's an idea that's thrown around. And then there's also these ideas of, which I've heard kind of unsubstantiated, like in stories mostly, of specific punishments that people get. Like I remember one story being told to me as a very young child, like maybe like 8 years old. My rabbi was telling the class a story about, out of context, again, not on any textual reference specifically. It was just kind of a general idea. Like one of the most important commandment for Jews is not to gossip. And it's very focused upon, because that's an extremely hard thing to do, to not gossip. Humans love gossiping. and it's viewed as a very extreme sin to tell tales about somebody behind their back or to speak badly about somebody behind their back. It's considered very bad. The idea of is for with
it's complicated.
Yeah, it's complicated. Kind of lost my train of thought for a second, but
that's okay.
Yeah, it's complicated and oh, okay, I remember. I was telling you about that story. My rabbi was telling the class about a story about a person who had a friend, and he told his friend, like, hey, when you die and go up there, come to me in a dream and let me know what's happening up there. I'm curious. So the friend died one day, and the next night his friend went to sleep, and the friend appeared to him in a dream. Oh no, wait, I'm sorry. He died, and then he received no response from his friend in his dreams, and he was like, okay, I guess my friend is not able to come to me for whatever reason. And then a year later, his friend appeared to him in a dream, and he said, "What took you so long? I asked you to come speak to me about what's going on." And he said, "Well, it turns out that in my life I had gossiped too much, and I had told too many tales. And my punishment for this was that I had to eat a red hot coal, and I had to eat it, and it took me a year to eat the coal, so that's why I couldn't come to you." And like that was a story that was told. That terrified me as a kid. I was like, "Holy shit!
Yeah,
that's insane."
That's some heavy stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And again, this is not textually substantiated. These are kind of like folk tales, kind of just to scare you, basically. But they had a very strong effect on me when, everything that you're being taught is immutable fact. Like,
yeah. Wow. What do you believe now? Like, what do you call yourself religiously now?
So I would say I identify as not religious. Specifically because I still have so much interaction with religious people. I still interact with my family a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I have siblings who are still very religious. They're younger than me, who are still very religious. Who I try not to influence them too much because I feel people really should make their own decisions in life.
Mm-hmm.
So I try not to discuss things too much with them. I just do my own thing, and I try to do what feels right for me. But I don't really identify as an atheist or agnostic, just because I'm still so heavily involved in this religious culture that I kind of would identify as not religious, just because so many people around me identify as religious. With regard to God and the creator of the universe and such metaphysical things like that, it's still something I can't really come to grips with, honestly. Like it's still so implanted in me, the idea of like the true God. Like it's something I have to intellectually work very, like when I was telling you earlier, like it almost makes me feel weird to say that like the Torah isn't 100% true. Like it's still very difficult for me to dismiss the idea of like a creator of the universe. I would say most likely I identify closest with agnostic.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way to know, and until evidence is presented, I cannot know one way or another.
I've been listening to some really interesting arguments recently, and there's this one that I find fascinating, which is the idea that if we're just talking about creation, the way that the world got here, religious people, it's kind of on them to prove God. You know what I mean? Like where there's no point in saying that you don't believe in God or that you believe there is no God, because that's not really an argument. Like if you were in court, that wouldn't be a defense.
Right.
The idea is that if you wanted to try to argue for or against God, if you actually wanted to argue against God, you would have to present evidence to the contrary. You would have to say that this is how the world was created. God didn't create it. But still, when you think about it like that, the idea of God existing, that's something that it's up to religious people to prove to us. So we have this system where, like what you're talking about with being raised in Orthodox, how when you're raised into that kind of thing, you're surrounded by so much guilt and shame. Like you talked about how, like, it can give you anxiety and depression. I mean, for some people it tears their life apart. For some people, I could see, like, this might be too much information, but, like, when I first started having sex, I mean, I struggled to get an erection sometimes. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's this thing that, you just kind of have that because, you're terrified about whether or not you're gonna, you're gonna go to hell and you're gonna sin for it, even if you don't believe it anymore. You just kind of, it's just sort of ingrained in you to feel guilty or feel like there's something wrong with you or feel ashamed of yourself.
Yeah, it's conditioning. That's what it is.
Yeah, to even question whether or not, what you were taught was correct.
Yeah, and excuse me. It's I would say that's absolutely true, and I would even say that's kind of underemphasized almost. I mean, obviously, a religion would not want to emphasize that, but it's I think it affects way more people than even within the communities than people will admit or even talk about, because there's within these communities the idea is and again, especially the more extreme you get, the more these things apply on the spectrum, that the idea is to be as similar to your peers as possible. Like, the idea is every Jew should be living the same life with the same ideals, the same, dressing the same, acting the same, doing the same things. Like, that is the ideal, and deviating from that is like, whoa, what are you doing? Like, like you're not part of the crowd. Like, like, even the tiniest things, like the type of shoes you wear, the type of belt you wear, like, everything is so heavily analyzed. And meant to be conformed to. And what's even kind of bizarre about this is, with specific regard to, like, yeshivish people and Hasidic people, the period of Judaism that they decided was like, this is where we're stopping, and, like, this is like what Judaism is supposed to be, is like 18th century Poland, which is very strange. Like, that was a completely different time where many of the things that were happening in that time were for very specific reasons. Like Jews were heavily persecuted in that time, and, like, they had to stay in ghettos and, like, have these tight knit communities. Was the only way they could survive.
Mm-hmm.
And they dressed a certain way because, like, they wanted to identify themselves as Jews, but the way they dressed was the style of dress that everyone in that time, like, wore, like, long fur coats and fur hats. Like, that was just the style of dress, and that they kind of adopted. And these styles of dress and these ways of thinking, and that kind of developed during that time. That period was also the time when it was kind of a renaissance of the yeshiva, where, like, there had been, like, a lot of persecution and inquisitions and, like, being chased around before that, and a lot of tradition and stuff was lost in these persecutions. And Poland, it's kind of between the period of, like, the 1800s, kind of leading up to the Holocaust, when all that ended, was a time of kind of the renaissance of the yeshiva, when you had these massive yeshivas, like in Lithuania, where thousands of students would learn under these massive rabbis, and that is kind of where they stopped. And what, like, a personal theory, I've never really discussed this with anybody, but a personal theory I have for this is the Holocaust was so frightening to the Jews that, like, they really came extremely close to wiping out almost all the Jewish people,
right,
and all the tradition, and that it was like, we need to preserve what we have right now, like, we need to preserve it by any means necessary. And I think that kind of got out of hand, because, like, from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, once you start getting to the 70s, 80s, that's already the children and grandchildren of these Holocaust survivors. But the children, their parents were telling them directly all the stuff that happened and the importance of keeping the tradition. But then, then the grandchildren hear it, and it starts getting slightly less and less, but you still have this fundamentalist belief, and it's fascinating that that's the period that Orthodox Judaism is stuck in, because it is. Like, in the 1500s and 1400s, Judaism wouldn't look anything like it does today. Like, the ideas would be the same. The Torah probably would be the same, like the same Torah, but the way it was interpreted and the way people did things, the customs, completely different, unrecognizable. Which is just fascinating.
I think that's a good theory. I mean, I think that it makes sense. You know, like if you feel like your entire culture is on the brink of genocide, on the brink of it, you know, of it being erased. I mean, sure. I mean, you would have people that want to dig their heels in and preserve as much of it as humanly possible.
Yeah, and that definitely I would say it had a massive effect on Orthodox Judaism, as being seen as like we must preserve our traditions by any means necessary. Like we need and we need to teach all the kids. Like we need to make sure that they are following the tradition. Like and the problem is the you know this is almost I would say not even necessarily the fault of Orthodox Judaism. The world changed so dramatically in the past, even, 50, 60 years. It's mind-boggling how much the world has changed. And Orthodox Judaism, it happened so fast. Like Orthodox Jews were just starting to tell everyone they can't use the internet and they can't listen. You can't listen to iPods or whatever. And then the internet comes, and then they have to tell everyone that the internet is forbidden. But like suddenly everyone uses the internet, and you need it for business, and like it's still forbidden, but like everyone uses it. Like what are we supposed to do? Like they're really struggling with a lot of these modernization issues.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a big part of it is more of the world just moving incredibly fast.
Were any of the reasons that you were taught, you know, to believe what you believe, was any of it based on not necessarily as much like the actual beliefs themselves, but that, you know, you would basically be taught that, you know, to feel guilty or ashamed of not believing it because you were contributing to, you know, the loss of that culture?
So not really, because within the Orthodox communities and yeshivish schools, the concept of not believing is not a concept. It's a concept that like heretics don't believe, but like it's not like you're not supposed to like have like I don't think I ever heard like any examples of any kids in my class ever like really like doubting like is this true? It's just like no, like this happened, like and of course they do give as you get older and kids naturally start to be curious, they will start to give some of these proofs like the Sinai proof I was talking about before, that like how could millions of people be deceived, and uh they start to give arguments. Of course, they all have many fallacies in them, and they're all viewed through the lens of Torah being immutable and Judaism being true in the first place. So, of course, they're not going to try to disprove that.
Mm-hmm.
But the concept of not believing is not really a concept. It's like this is what Jews do, and like this is the facts, and that's all there is to it. And if you're not doing that, it's because of a temptation or like whatever. But it's like the Torah is true. Like there's no debate about that. It's not something which is really discussed. And although in Orthodox Judaism, it's a big point. They like to make a big point. The rabbis quite often that in Orthodox Judaism, you can ask questions. In Christianity, they tell you to shut up when you ask questions. But in Judaism, you can ask any question you want. Like, yeah, you can ask any question you want. You might get a really stupid answer that makes no sense, though. Right. The asking questions is viewed as good. Like, intellectualism is viewed as a good thing. Questioning is viewed as a good thing, but up to a certain degree. Like, and the goal of the questioning is to circle yourself back to the original answer, almost.
So if they didn't talk about, apostasy or apostates or just in general people, who are questioning their faith or anything like that, how did they address things in the Torah when they talked about, for example, punishment for people who didn't believe?
So again, like I mentioned before, it's kind of interesting actually that it's done the way it's done. That the children, with regard to the Torah itself, the children are not really taught in depth past Exodus, past the actual stories. Like once you start, like don't get me wrong, like we learned all the laws about like how to build the temple, and like I was tested on them and all that stuff. But it was not as in depth, and because it wasn't stories, it's much harder to connect to the idea of like make sure to build this 10 cubits high, 5 cubits wide, and 7 cubits long. Like I don't really like that's not interesting really. So and I had to be tested on all that stuff, and I did have to know it, but. That part where he talks about that in Leviticus is also where many of the punishments are discussed, and the Torah itself talking about like different illicit relationships and different things are not supposed to be done. And that is also where the infamous "a man shall not lie with another man, or he shall be stoned, for it is an abomination" passage is in Leviticus as well.
Hmm.
Also, something that never would be discussed in Orthodox schools because again, sexuality doesn't exist, so homosexuality definitely does not exist.
So they just talked about it. They just talked about it very carefully and didn't really address it too much in the same way that they didn't address sexuality.
Exactly. Like in the actual Torah text itself, it's like you should not lie with another man, and then it's like a woman should not lie with a cow. Like a woman should. And interestingly, in the Torah, it actually never says a woman should not lie with another woman. Interesting fact.
Hmm.
But it only says man and man. But it mostly focuses on like illicit relationships with animals and like sleeping with like your sisters and incest and stuff like that. All these illicit relationships absolutely never discussed. I'm never learned, never talked about, and I didn't even hear. I didn't, but because sexuality is not discussed, it's like so outside the pale of understanding that it's not even something you would consider or think about until you're a teenager and you start learning about these things, and then you're like, wait, like damn, the Torah is pretty crazy actually, talking about a lot of stuff I never knew about.
Yeah, yeah. Do you associate with anybody who was a former member of your community, or do you associate with? I believe there's a group that's called like Off the Derech, where it's like people who have
Right.
who have left Orthodox communities. Like, are you associated with any people like that?
So it's kind of the catchphrase for Jews who have left yeshivish and Orthodox communities is called, like you said, Off the Derech or OTD for an abbreviation.
Forgive my mispronunciation,
yeah.
by the way.
No. It's these. Also, like I'm kind of using yeshivish people have a different pronunciation than like Hebrew or Israeli people would have, and like modern Orthodox tend to like learn the Israeli and Hebrew pronunciations, and yeshivish people have like their own way, uh, um, like for heaven, let's say, like in Hebrew it's Olam Haba is the Hebrew word, but yeshivish people would pronounce it like Olam Haba.
Huh.
Like it's a completely different pronunciation. Just a product of kind of Yiddish mixing in with German, mixing in with different languages when they were doing their thing in Poland in those times.
Gotcha.
Kind of carried over. So don't worry about the pronunciation. The Jews can't agree on it either. But anyway, that's kind of like the catch-all phrase that kind of developed is he's off the derech. With the derech literally translates to path. So he's off the path. That's the translation. The path being Orthodox Judaism.
Gotcha.
And so I frequent some Reddit subreddits that kind of focus on that with where there's kind of a community of people who were formerly religious, and I sometimes I'm not really so super involved, but I read their submissions, and it's nice to. It's very difficult as an ex-Orthodox Jew to find people who can really understand like what you're talking about and like what you mean when like and your life experiences. Like people can't comprehend what it's like to grow up in a community like that. It's just a lot more than people think.
I'd imagine,
and,
yeah.
And seeing people discuss, how they grew up and seeing it being very similar to me and talking with them and watching them, work through their own difficulties. It's something which is very difficult to find. So thank goodness for the internet.
Yeah.
And other than that, most of my real life friends, most of them are Jewish. I would say most of my acquaintances and friends are Jewish, just as a product of people I knew growing up in my social circles. But most of them are either like they grew up like modern Orthodox, but like their parents weren't very religious. They kind of just did it like for the tradition, and like they themselves are not really religious at all, if even a little bit. I don't really have any friends that were as serious as I was growing up, who went off the D, as they say, off the derech. I did actually have one close childhood friend who he was more like his family is kind of more like in that like all encompassing, like I was talking about, like they were more like yeshivish, like the whole family getting into it. And I was close childhood friends with this guy, and I'm a few years older than him. After I kind of started going off, he started like not following me, but he's a very independent guy, always doing his own thing. But he's also started to not be religious, and there was a point for about a year or two when he was fully not religious at all. He wouldn't keep Shabbos. He would have sex with random girls and just do whatever he pleased. But we didn't really discuss it much from a theological perspective because this guy, very interesting guy, his opinion of what he was doing was he still believed in Judaism and Orthodox Judaism, and he still fully believed in all of it. His view is that like I'm just going through a rough patch right now. I'm just figuring things out. Like like the urge is too strong. The desires are too strong. It was not like Orthodox Judaism mistake. Like he was a believer his entire life, even when he was throwing a middle finger up to God. Like he wasn't really, like he was just doing whatever. Like it's kind of hard to explain. So I never really had like discussions with him like theologically about like Judaism because he didn't agree with me. Like he thinks it's all real. I would try to tell him like, dude, like you're a hypocrite first of all,
Mm-hmm.
and he's like I don't care. Like I believe it. I believe in all of it. I'm just not strong enough at the moment, basically. Again, very interesting guy, considering he was raised the same way I was. And sure enough, um, about a year or two, I want to say 2 years after he kind of started doing his own thing, about 6 months ago, he pretty much fully returned to Orthodox Judaism. Like now he's back to studying in the yeshivas, back to keeping everything. Just interesting. Like that can tend to happen. I've definitely seen it happen multiple times where people kind of, and that's also, like I said before, kind of a lot more acceptable for boys than girls to explore and like have fun. And then as long as they come back at the end, like that's all that matters.
Hmm.
But for girls, it's like, nah, you messed yourself over.
Yeah. Does your family still call you Jewish?
So in Orthodox Judaism, a Jew cannot renounce their faith.
Right.
If you are born with a Jewish mother, and it does go through the mother, not the father,
Mm-hmm.
According to Orthodox Judaism. If you are born with a Jewish mother, you are Jewish for the rest of your life. You were born a Jew and you will die a Jew, according to Jews. There's nothing you can do to change their mind about that.
So to them, you are still Jewish.
Yeah, and I, even if I would literally, I could come to my parents one day and be like, I have accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. Like I have seen the light, and like they would be like really pissed. But I would still be just as Jewish. Like nothing would change at all. There is no way to renounce yourself to a community. You can obviously believe whatever you want to believe about yourself, but the community will always consider you Jewish. And not to get too morbid, but if I were to like die in a car accident as a Christian, fully believing in Jesus, my parents would, unless obviously like I had indicated otherwise, but if I had left no instructions, it was sudden, didn't expect it to happen, I would be buried in a Jewish cemetery according to Jewish tradition, pretty much no matter what I did in my life.
How do you feel about that? I mean, with what you believe now, I mean, do you even call yourself like culturally Jewish and not religiously Jewish, or is just Judaism not a part of your identity whatsoever anymore?
So I would say being a Jew is still part of my identity. Just again, just dealing with being around religious people all the time. My family's still very religious. I still meet people and speak with them all the time who are religious. And more than that, like there is a concept of like a Jewish identity where the Jewish people as a culture have gone through so much, over the years. And there is the idea of like being part of the Jewish nation kind of, and that kind of manifests for me in Israel, which, like I said, I don't want to get into too much of a political discussion about that, but that's kind of how it manifests. And it's I would say I identify as like a Jewish person, but not religious in any way. And with regard to how my family and community would view it, I was just thinking about this the other day. The only issue I would really have, because in my opinion, when I die, I think the most likely thing that's going to happen is just lights out, like before you were born. And I think that's the most likely outcome. Even if there is like a cosmic energy or power, like energy is not conscious, so you're not conscious of being energy, even if that concept is true.
Right.
But the only difficulty that I have that I'm kind of still trying to figure out how to deal with this is Jewish tradition does not allow for Jews to be organ donors. A Jew needs to be buried with all his organs. You cannot perform an autopsy on a Jew. You cannot remove any of the organs or their blood or anything. The body needs to be buried fully intact. And one of the reasons for this is because Jews believe in that when they are redeemed and the Messiah, or Mashiach as it's called, will come, because that is also a massive part of fundamentalist belief in Judaism, is that there is a Messiah and he will come any day. Like, you're supposed to believe that he's coming today. Like, that is the belief you're taught. Like, you need to believe he's coming today. And when he doesn't come today, the next day you believe he's coming today. Like, and you're always supposed to believe that, like, in the redemption and that the Messiah is on the way. And one of the fundamental beliefs of the Messiah and the messianic age that will come is that the dead will rise. There will be reincarnation of all the people who deserve to be reincarnated. It's kind of difficult to classify exactly who that is. Again, different opinions, but there will be reincarnation, and a person needs all their organs and limbs to be reincarnated. Now, if God is like reincarnating you, I don't see why he couldn't just like put your limbs and organs back if he's already reincarnating you. But that's the fundamental belief. So Jews are not, Orthodox Jews cannot be organ donors. It is permitted to donate an organ while you are alive, however, if you know, like, if it's not an essential organ like a kidney. But Jews cannot be organ donors, and that's something which is a little problematic for me, because I would love to be an organ donor, because if I'm dead, I would love for somebody else to be alive if I'm not there, and give someone else a chance at life. But if I were to put organ donor on my driver's license, which I can do as I'm an adult, you know, nobody's stopping me. If I were to do that, it would cause a lot of pain to my family if eventually I will die. And even if hopefully I don't die before my parents do. But if something like that were, to happen, it would cause a lot of added pain, especially to my parents. And even if, even to anybody in my family who wanted me to, because it's super important to Jews that other Jews are buried in the proper way. Like, it's like considered like you need to give their soul like to get to closer to God in heaven. Like, you need to do it properly. Like, it's considered also like one of the fundamental parts of like when you're born you get circumcised, when you die you're buried in the Jewish tradition. Like, those are like fundamental. So it would cause a lot of pain to people in my family possibly. But at the same time, like, I want to donate my organs. If I can't use them anymore, why shouldn't someone else use them?
Right.
So that's probably the only thing I struggle with. Other than that, I don't care if I'm in a casket or wrapped in a shawl. Like, it doesn't matter to me. I'm dead.
Right. I appreciate that, though, man. It's like you're concerned about your family. I mean, even though you don't agree with them about everything, it's just like
listen. I despite all the stuff that's gone on, and I don't get me wrong, I've had plenty of fights with my parents about all this and all that stuff. I still love my family as a family, as people who are more special to me because I'm related to them. And to my family's credit, they are becoming more accepting of me and like allowing me to do my own thing and not being super upset about it like they used to be. Mm-hmm. And yeah, like I definitely don't want to cause them any unnecessary pain, but it's kind of a balance between doing what I feel is right for myself and figuring myself out and trying not to cause them any unnecessary distress.
Yeah,
because I do love my parents and my family.
Yeah. Quick side note, your what you were taught about how you kind of always need to be prepared for the Messiah to arrive.
Yes.
What you just described as what will happen when that happens is exactly what I was taught about what would happen when Jesus comes back. So that's I don't know if that's just like a coincidence or if you knew that, but yeah, I mean that's.
I was kind of aware that like that. I mean, I'm aware of like the idea that Jesus will return, and I actually was not aware that Christians believe that all the righteous dead will be reincarnated. That is very interesting. It is my personal opinion. Not like I haven't done an incredible amount of research, although I know many people have. That religions absolutely influenced each other in many ways. Like Christians may have taken that from the Jews, and Jews may have taken the idea of extreme chastity from Christians, and all sorts of cross-cultural things.
It's not even just the Abrahamic religions. That's what's weird, man. I was talking to a to an ex Hindu, and I posted his episode last Saturday. He had almost the exact same sex education as not quite what you had, because he actually had sex education, but you know the whole thing about masturbation and it being women's responsibilities and everything like that, and just like how premarital sex just in general was frowned upon. So it's just a universal thing in religions, that probably not exactly all of the predictions about how the world is going to end and everything like that, but the similarities are staggering, and it's not just in Abrahamic
Absolutely
religions.
Staggering. And again, that's something that from inside of a religion is not something that's going to be taught to you or explained or looked at in any way. It's just like, no, like those guys are like, obviously their fairy tales are just fairy tales, but like obviously ours aren't. Like that's how it's taught in every religion.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just something so fascinating that like objectively there's so much cross-cultural, mixing going on. There clearly has to be something more going on here. They can't all be right and they can't all be wrong. Well, they can all be wrong, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I was always taught about, like, yes, there are these other stories that are similar to Jesus's, but Jesus is the one that all of those are based on. Like, that's
right,
what I was always taught.
And you were taught, like, every anything that is in other religions, they copied it, It's very simple. They copied it from the Jews,
Yep.
So that's what every religion is taught, basically, and it's fascinating to see the similarities between them.
Yeah, no, it really is. Was there anything else that you wanted to share? Anything else that you wanted to say? Anything you wanted to say to people in these communities? Anything you wanted to say to other people who, who want to kind of consider themselves ex-Jews? Just anything in general that I didn't touch on. But this has been amazing. Just if you have anything else, feel free to share it or say it to them.
Okay. I would say that. This is going to be a mix of my personal opinions and what I think is objective, but
go for it.
I think that that it this is going to be a little controversial, but my opinion is that all of the Orthodox Abrahamic religions, I'm talking, evangelical Christianity, extreme Islam, the way it's taken in a lot of these countries, and Orthodox Judaism, Yeshivish Judaism, Hasidic Judaism in many cases. I believe that they are cult-like in their ways of thinking and in their ways of indoctrination and in their ways of forcing people to conform and believe a certain way, or you will be ostracized, and to create these punishments and ways to keep people in line and control people. They're all very similar, and my opinion is that I'm not going to say child abuse, but bordering on child abuse, in my opinion, to just indoctrinate in that way. Now, obviously, people have been doing that, and people will teach their kids what they believe in, for thousands of years. That's just my opinion. I think that it's extremely damaging to present something so unobjectively and to fight so hard to keep any sort of objective reasoning out of the picture in all these religions. With regard specifically to Orthodox Judaism, I would say it is very difficult, and it's even more difficult for people like who are gay. It's extremely difficult in the Orthodox community because you don't choose to be gay. You're taught that gay people are evil, which means that you're evil, and you never even done anything, but you're just having these thoughts, and that means you're evil. Like, and that's a common theme across these Abrahamic religions. And I would say that things are getting better. The world is becoming more secular. There's a lot more information out there for people to access. And even these communities are a lot of them are starting to soften their stances in many ways. On certain things, they just won't compromise in any way or on anything, but the world is becoming more accepting. It's just very slow for these religions, but the Judaism today and Orthodox Jews, Yeshivish people, they talk about things and they have conferences about things that even like 30 years ago just would never have been discussed, like child sexual abuse. Like it unfortunately does happen in these communities, just like it happens in the Christian communities and in Islamic communities. And I can't speak too much on those other two, but on Orthodox Judaism, it was very much a swept under the rug thing. which is very much now starting to come into more into the open, where victims are starting to press charges, and people, and it's becoming like more unacceptable, as in like you will, it used to be like we'll sweep it under the rug, and that also stems, in my opinion, from the old country, where like you had, the government was just out to get the Jews, and like it was the Jews against the government. Like you just had to stick together, and you never tell on another Jew to the government. Like a Jew who told on another Jew is like one of the worst things in those communities. Like the absolute worst. Like you'll be excommunicated. Like nobody will speak to you. Like if you're a snitch to the government and you get other Jews in trouble or put other Jews in jail, like that's the worst thing you can do. And that's starting to change as we start to, as the world starts to become more secular, more rationalist, and we understand that people need to be held accountable for their actions, regardless of why they did them, how they did them, anything like that. So I would say to any ex-Jews or Orthodox Jews who are considering leaving the religion, it's much easier now than it's ever been, and you just need to do what you believe is right, and follow your, it's kind of a little corny, but follow your heart. Like it's really true. Like if you believe in Judaism or any religion, and it brings you happiness to have a belief system and believe you're going to go somewhere when you die, as long as you're not infringing on other people's rights and affecting other people's lives, that's great. A balance needs to be struck, and I think that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. But I think that we can get to a point where religion is optional, as in you believe what you want to believe, and nobody's going to well, it will never fully get rid of that, but it's going to become easier and easier to live the life that you want to live, as opposed to being forced to live in a community where you either think like everyone else or be cast out.
If it isn't obvious by now, I think highly of modern Reform Judaism. Yes, it has its issues and corruption. For example, I'm no fan of circumcision, and I have no doubt that there could be someone who commits terrible things in the name of what he learned in the Torah and claims to not be Orthodox. But I think a lot about what William Mervar has said about finding in Judaism an invitation for skepticism, questioning, and criticism. You'll hear about that being encouraged in Judaism, far more than you'll hear about it from even a mildly religious Christian. My wife was born Jewish, and now considers herself agnostic and a non-practicing Jew. She was raised conservatively, but not Orthodox. And the things that bother her about Judaism make her laugh a lot more than they actually make her want to push back against the view that you're always Jewish if your mother is Jewish. For example, a few years ago, her grandmother died, and at the funeral service, she told me that the rabbi was definitely going to say something in the eulogy about hoping she and I have kids soon. I thought she was joking. He mentioned it about 3 minutes in. We both laughed. The burial was very practical. They believe the body is just a vessel, and you shouldn't think on it too much when someone dies because the soul isn't in it anymore. So we all shoveled some dirt on the coffin as a small gesture and moved on. A lot of my friends growing up were Jewish. I have no idea how I became part of a community of Jewish goth musicians, but I was in a band that had 2 of them. We stayed friends for almost 10 years after that. This is why it surprises me to hear about what happens in Orthodox Jewish communities. I had a feeling that the similarities between it and other forms of fundamentalism would be staggering at face value. But it's one thing for a religion to already be restrictive and its fundamentalists to be even more so, like Christianity, and another for a religion to be somewhat enlightened and its fundamentalists to be even more restrictive than those of some others. I'm glad Isaac was able to get away. I've only been able to speak with one other person who left an Orthodox community so far, and it might just be that I don't know exactly where to find them. The ex-Jew subreddit is small, because many people who no longer fully believe in the God of the Torah might not even call themselves ex-Jewish. And I haven't been able to find an online community of self-titled non-practicing Jews. Isaac hopes that putting himself out there like this will bring more forward, as do I. If you're listening, and you've left Judaism, you're not alone. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a written review with 5 stars and share it with someone you trust. For immediate updates and discussions, follow the show on Twitter @OutFoldPodcast. Special thanks to Isaac for approving all of this conversation being shared. Logo and artwork by my wife. Production by my wife and I. All music by me. This has been Out of the Fold.